Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight reviews and especially my main final fight breakdown and my fight review of the Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach Jr. fight. And for those of you, of course, that did not end up seeing the card, it was a decent card, but really one that was kind of shaping out to be not really that great. Of course, until that of the final main fight, which of course was a very decent fight, not necessarily because I thought that I had seen the best version of Gervonta Davis or because Gervonta Davis had really put up a great fight, but because, of course, for those of you that did not know, this fight ended up in a majority draw. I believe that one of the judges scored it 115 to 113, and I believe that the other two judges, of course, scored it 114 to 114. And of course, a certain amount of people are claiming that Lamont Roach Jr. ended up getting majorly robbed and a certain amount of other things. Well, listen, what I'll state is this. And if you've seen my channel, you know that I'm not really a big fan or I'm not really a big user of the quote unquote robbery, slang term or, the robbery term quite often because oftentimes more than not, a fight is usually not a robbery, but it's a fight that could have potentially went either way, or was a 7 rounds to 5 fight that maybe could have went to either way, or maybe that one guy that maybe had just pulled it out. That being stated, if you're going to ask me who I thought deserved the fight a little bit more out of these two fighters, I thought that Lamont Roach Jr. should have been the victor. I'm not going to state that this fight was a robbery necessarily. I'm not going to say that this fight was like an Araceli Lara versus Paul Williams or Pernell Sweet Pete Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez, Senior. I'm not going to say that it was that bad of a robbery, but I do believe overall that the wrong man ended up getting the victory tonight. Now, of course, it was not a victory, but let's be real. A draw is pretty much a victory for a Gervonta Davis because if he ends up suffering his first loss tonight to a guy like Lamont Roach Jr., who has lost to Jamel Herring in the past, and a guy that is a relatively unknown fighter, it's pretty much going to not, have his same brand, throughout the rest of his career. And that being stated, before maybe I talk about some of the other fights, if I even do talk about some of the other fights, because of course I went 1-1-1 on this fight card. I got the Alberto Puello versus Sandor Martin fight right. The Jose Valenzuela versus Gary Antoine Russell fight. I ended up predicting Jose Valenzuela, so I got that prediction wrong. But I'm not really surprised at the way the fight went. But of course, the biggest surprise of the card was the Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach Jr. fight. And let me state this very, very quickly. I've seen many people, whether it be from the LDBC or new media channels, or whether it be from other boxing channels, or, whoever it may be. There's many boxing fans that always complain about corruption in the sport. There's many boxing fans that always complain. For example, I remember when the Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury fight, when that fight ended up happening, and people said, like Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV, like, oh, Fury had a long count and all this other stuff. But the worst officiated fight I think that I've ever personally seen has to be this one right here, at least when you talk about the worst officiated fight live. Now, of course, there are definitely worse officiated fights than this one in terms of how the referee performed, like that of an Amir Khan versus Lamont Peterson, in my personal view, or that, probably of, Joseph Abeko versus, Abner Mares, who was allowed to throw 20 plus low blows within that fight, and the referee, really didn't say anything throughout that whole entire fight. But that being stated, Steve Willis, who usually is a pretty good referee, he was absolutely awful throughout the majority of this fight. He was awful. I mean, there was several missed calls. I mean, literally the only thing that he was calling was that sometimes there was low blows by that of Gervonta Davis. First of all, I believe it was either in round 3 or round 4 when I seen Lamont Roach that he was starting to come out of his shell a little bit and starting to lose a little bit of his composure. And I was kind of wondering, what was really the cause of that. Maybe Gervonta Davis, maybe his trash talk was just starting to get to that of Lamont Roach Jr. But then I seen in the replay that Gervonta Davis had shouldered that of Gervonta, or excuse me, that Gervonta Davis had shouldered that of Lamont Roach Jr. straight in the face, which is an illegal tactic. Now, it's not illegal overall to use your shoulder to kind of balance yourself or to kind of maybe push them up against the ropes, but he didn't do that. What he did was almost an MMA move, and he slammed his shoulder and used his momentum to slam it into his face. That is a penalty, and that is something overall that should have been warned, and I don't even remember it being brought up by that of Steve Willis. And then later on in the fight, very particularly interesting. I don't even remember what round it was. I think maybe it was like round 7 or something. Gervonta Tank Davis at the beginning of the round, before not even like, right as soon as the bell came out, literally in the middle of boxing. Lamont Roach Jr. ends up landing a jab. Gervonta Tank Davis turns around, takes a knee, which should be considered 100% a knockdown. I've never seen a boxing fight where a fighter ended up taking a knee in a boxing fight and the referee did not call it a knockdown. I've never personally seen that. Steve Willis basically, almost is about to count it as a knockdown, and then he basically throws it off just because Gervonta Tank Davis stated that something was in his eye, which is something that is completely against the rules, because although Gervonta Tank Davis stated that, of course, something was in his eye, and I believe Gervonta Tank Davis, I believe that more than likely that, some sort of gel or something from his hair was in his eye. But at the end of the day, if the eye is injured or if it is compromised at the current moment in time, and he ends up taking a knee, you have to 110% of the time count that as a knockdown, because that could have been from a punch. That could have been, maybe blinded them for a moment, or, created a corneal abrasion. So Steve Willis was definitely operating outside of the main boxing rules. And that's why I say, when many people claim all this other stuff about certain fights being corrupt or the referee cheating in certain bouts. Listen, there are certain moments where I thought maybe certain referees definitely could have done a little bit better. Like Tony Weeks, I thought could have been better against Andre Ward and Sergey Kovalev in the second fight, because I do think that those punches were a little bit low that Andre Ward was throwing. Kenny Bayless, of course, with David Benavidez and Caleb Plant, he was splitting them up way, way, way too often in the fight. Clearly, kind of trying to get Caleb Plant to rest a little bit at certain times, or, overall for David Benavidez not to get in certain inside work. But I've never seen a referee, first of all, not call a shoulder, a shoulder strike. And then on top of that, the fighter ends up taking a knee. And overall, they don't count that. I mean, Tony Weeks, he didn't have the best of performances when Marcos Maidana and Floyd Mayweather fought. Like, I remember when Maidana did the knee, and of course, he also had the low blow. But I mean, at least that was even a little bit understandable, because Floyd was holding so many times throughout some of the parts of that fight. Not stating overall that Floyd, of course, was not fighting, offensively as well, but at least you can kind of understand to where if you hold a little bit too often, that that's going to happen. But I've never seen a fighter to where he was initiating the holds and then he was allowed overall, to shoulder someone straight in the face. It doesn't even get addressed by the referee, at least to what I remember. Then later on, he ends up taking a knee and it's not counted as a knockdown. Like, are you serious? Like, I've never personally seen that happen in a fight. Anytime I've seen a fighter ever take a knee during a fight, it was always counted as a knockdown. Like, even in a fight to where, certain referees weren't 100% sure, what the hell happened. Like when Mayweather took a knee, I believe early on in his career, because he hurt his hand and he had to take a knee, it was counted as a knockdown. Joe McClellan against Nigel Benn, when he finally took a knee, kind of a little bit more out of nowhere, at least comparative to other parts of the fight, it was counted as a knockdown. But this was not counted as a knockdown. Just really shameful performance in my personal view by that of a Steve Willis. Now, that being stated, why in my personal view did Gervonta Tank Davis, why overall did he have such a problem against that of a Lamont Roach Jr.? Well, really for a multitude of reasons. First of all, we do have to ask ourselves, did Gervonta Tank Davis underestimate that of a Lamont Roach? I'm not really quite sure. What I will state is that Gervonta Tank Davis, even early on, that he definitely either A, looked distracted or he looked very nervous. He looked very nervous against Lamont Roach Jr. for whatever particular reason. Now, who knows? Maybe he was just kind of trying to carry the fight and maybe make it a little bit more entertaining. And then, the stuff ended up getting in his eyes, or Lamont Roach ended up being a bit tougher than what he thought. And then by the time that he realized it, maybe it was a bit too late. I don't know. But, Gervonta Tank Davis, it just definitely was not his best performance. Now, this is not the only time that I've seen Gervonta Tank Davis have the not so hot performances. Like, I've seen him in certain fights to where I thought either A, that he was losing the fight before, he ended up knocking the guy out, such as that of a Rolly Romero, or, maybe some other fights. But this is possibly the worst performance in Gervonta Tank Davis's career. It probably has to be, because, of course, it was counted as a draw, and really, in my view, should have been a fight that he probably should have lost. And not even just because I thought that he lost 7 rounds to 5, but because taking a knee instantly should constitute as a knockdown. There's no argument, especially overall, once again, when it is something about your eye. There's no doubt about it. Steve Willis made a very big error their overall, or, he definitely was on Gervonta Davis's payroll, or was told by Al Heyman that Gervonta Davis is clearly the favorite. Whatever the reason being, Steve Willis had a very terrible performance within this fight, but it is what it is. But anyways, that being stated, I give Lamont Roach a great amount of credit. I thought that he fought at a great range throughout the majority of the fight, something that Jose Valenzuela was not able to do against Gary Antoine Russell. If Jose Valenzuela, for example, if he was going to put on a great performance against that of a of a Gary Antoine Russell, I told people that he needed to use his feet a little bit more. Something about Jose Valenzuela that he's always had a problem with is that he'll take a couple sets back, but then he'll just stay in the range for way too long. And we've seen that with Gary Russell Jr. throughout the whole entire fight. I think that the fight could have been winnable potentially for Jose Valenzuela, but he just didn't do a whole lot of things right. And off of that last performance off of Isaac Pitbull Cruz, that was possibly the worst thing that could have happened to him from this fight, because it made him believe that he was a much more defensively sound and better boxer than what he actually was. He was not using his feet, he was not using his jab to the best of degrees, and he was not willing to mix up with Gary Antoine Russell to the best of degrees. He needed to do all of that in order to win this fight. And had he done that, I think that he potentially could have won. But sometimes, we overestimate certain people's abilities, especially when that opponent ended up coming off of a loss. And Jose Valenzuela, in my view, what he showed me is that there are certain things that he cannot do that Alberto Puello was able to do. But that being stated, the reason why I bring that up is because everything that Jose Valenzuela did not do against Gary Antoine Russell is everything that Lamont Roach Jr. was able to do against that of a Gervonta Davis. He was able to counter very decently well. He used that jab very well at the beginning. He was kind of outthrowing Gervonta Davis. I thought that it was a little bit risky being a little bit too patient in the beginning of the fight. But for whatever reason, sometimes Gervonta Davis, he can be a little bit too patient for his own good sometimes. It takes him a little bit too long to land that lead hand, to land some of those good left hands either to the body or upstairs. And to be quite honest with you, Gervonta Davis's offense looked very limited here. He didn't really look like he had the same offense as before, and he definitely didn't look like he had the offensive ability as a Lamont Roach Jr. He just didn't have it. Lamont Roach Jr. had a great left hook in this fight. I didn't really see a great right hand counter over the top by Gervonta Davis. Now, to be quite fair, I'm not really quite sure if I've ever seen a supreme right hand counter over the top by Gervonta Davis. It's mainly his left that usually ends up getting the kill in the end, but I mean, it would have been nice to see a little bit more of that. So I'm going to have to really look at this and say, okay, was Gervonta Davis just really that off, or was he just never really as good of a boxer as maybe I had once predicted? But I definitely think I've seen better versions of Gervonta Davis. But the good thing about Roach here is that he was not intimidated by Gervonta Davis. And that's a big part of how you have to win. Many of these fighters, they end up getting in the ring with some of these guys and they can possibly win these fights, but they're too intimidated of that fighter. Like Jose Valenzuela versus Gary Antoine Russell. Once Gary Antoine Russell really started to get some of his punches off, Jose Valenzuela, he was like a deer in headlights. He just didn't really know what to do. He couldn't really get off his jab. He really couldn't counter very well. But to be honest with you, that also showed his limited boxing ability. So that fight really could have went either way. But I am very surprised once again that this fight, ended up going the way that it did, especially because Gervonta Davis would also give Lamont Roach credit for is this. The power, although there was certainly some times to where Gervonta Davis had hurt Lamont Roach Jr., there were some times when Lamont Roach Jr. had hurt Gervonta Davis as well. There was a couple of times to where Gervonta Davis's feet or legs were a little bit wobbly, where he would hit him with a good right hand or a good left hook, and it would get Gervonta Davis off balance a little bit. This was a very great competitive fight, when it came down to it. And Lamont Roach Jr., this is what you have to do in order to actually beat the champion. And not only beat the champion, but beat the A side. At the end, Abner Mara said, well, in order to really get the decision over the champion or to beat the champion, you have to really take it to him. It's not really about beating the champion. It's about beating the A side. It's always been about beating the A side. It's always about who is worth more money and who is possibly going to promote our brand better, or possibly is going to be worth more, near later on down the line. That's why Canelo Alvarez, even when he probably should have lost the first fight to Golovkin, or, probably, at best should have been scored a draw. That's the reason why they gave it a draw, because they knew that, Gennady Golovkin, some European fighter from Kazakhstan that barely speaks English, that there's no way that, who's at 36 years old, there's no way that he's going to end up carrying the torch, for greatness for the next decade for boxing. It was going to be Canelo Alvarez, and they tried to do it with Wilder and Fury as well. When they gave Wilder that draw, against Fury in the first part, of their, trilogy, they ended up doing it there. So once again, it's not always about beating the champion. What they're really stating is that it's really about beating the A side. And there was no question about who was the A side for this fight. But the draw, in my view, it's not necessarily a bad result. I just thought Lamont Roach Jr. did enough to win the fight. I thought that he landed the more effective punches throughout a lot of the fight. I thought that he showed that he was always a willing contender. His defense was very good. The only thing I will state is this. Sometimes he would kind of back up in a very linear and straight line some of the times. His right hand was always glued to his face, which of course I can appreciate because he was very defensively responsible. But in a rematch, for example, which I believe is more than likely going to happen, he's going to have to be a little bit more careful. He's going to have to really make sure overall that he kind of uses a little bit more of lateral movement, but that he also shows at the same time that he's not going to back down from Gervonta Davis and that he can throw some of those great body shots and headshots to Gervonta Davis, especially within certain exchanges. And I got to give Lamont Roach credit. He was not afraid to throw down with Gervonta Davis. And that's what you have to do in order to beat not just an all-time great level fighter, but an all-time great level talent. Now, I can't call Gervonta an all-time great level fighter, but I do think that he's a great talent, or debatably even an all-time great level talent. But the thing is that in order to beat those fighters, you have to show that you're courageous enough to actually beat them, like what George Kambosos did against Teofimo Lopez, or Bivol did against Canelo Alvarez, or, Bivol against Artur, certain guys like that. You have to actually show them that, you know what, I'm not just going to be like any of these other fighters. I'm not just going to, melt down or bend over, when you throw power my way. I'm going to actually try to win the fight. I'm going to try, overall to get my jab in there. I'm going to throw crucial shots to the body and crucial shots to the head. I'm not going to be afraid to exchange with you in certain moments. And that's what a lot of people like, like when you take a look at Inoue, for example, like, certain people, they try to box with Inoue, but then, once they start feeling the power and the speed, they start to retreat, and it's the same thing with Gervonta Davis. They start to retreat because they start feeling the power and they get a little bit overwhelmed. So then they're like, oh, well, then I'm just going to be, as patient as possible. And you can't do that. You have to fight back pretty much at all costs and act like you're going to try to really stop them, or act like you're really going to try to dominate them. That's the only way that you can really win those type of fights. And credit to Lamont Roach Jr., he's really the only one to this day that I've seen do that, at least as consistently well as what he was able to do. So very good on Mr. Lamont Roach Jr. for doing that. But once again, he was willing to throw at certain times when Gervonta was about to throw. He was willing to throw in certain exchanges. When Gervonta got him, he was willing to go right back in the trenches and try to get back at him. He was able to go on the inside, tie up Gervonta Davis. But then when he did tie up Gervonta Davis, he was willing to throw either in the exchanges and, do a little bit of dirty boxing, or throw right after, or right before the clinch. That's what you have to do in order to win the fight. Not like what K the Plan did against Canelo Alvarez, where he just stays up against the ropes way too long, or what Bivol did against Artur in the first fight. That's how you have to end up winning the fight. And Lamont Roach Jr., I thought, did it with great flying colors. I just thought that Gervonta Davis, if we take a look at his faults within this fight, I just think that his offense was way, way, way too repetitive. I think that he had a very tough time getting the jab off. I did not see a whole lot of double jabs or triple jabs. I think that he's going to have to work on that. And I just think that he was trying way too hard to land the knockout blow, But, it is what it is. But hopefully we'll see a better version of Gervonta Davis. That being stated, it's going to be very interesting because I just recently gave Shakur Stevenson a lot of criticism. Well, Gervonta Davis is going to have to receive even more. Because, the thing is that Gervonta Davis, obviously Roach, in my view, is a better opponent than that of a Joshua Padley. But the thing is that this fight on paper was not even supposed to be close. And in all honesty, I thought that Gervonta Davis probably just deserved to lose this fight, in my personal view. Although I don't think a draw is the worst scoring because there were certain rounds that could have went either way. But in my view, the first 4 rounds, I had Lamont Roach winning 3 of the first 4 rounds. I also had him, I believe, winning 2 of the last 3. So, I thought that Lamont Roach Jr. had won the fight. But it is what it is. But anyways, I ended up getting my Alberto Puello versus Sandor Martin fight right. that fight ended up pretty much going how I thought that it was going to go. The Jose Valenzuela versus Gary Anton Russell fight, I thought that Valenzuela was going to be willing to mix it up with him a little bit more. Unfortunately, Jose Valenzuela, he tried too much to be the boxer, and he's not a good enough boxer in order overall to just stay within the range that long with Gary Antoine Russell. He needed to use his feet, he needed to get out of range a little bit more and stick behind his jab and be first. He didn't do any of those things. So good job on Gary Antoine Russell for completely dominating that of a Jose Valenzuela. But once again, very interesting card. I don't think that it was the best fight card that I'd ever seen, and I thought that $80 definitely was way too much for this fight card. But that being stated, very good on Mr. Lamont Roach Jr. for taking it to Gervonta Davis and being willing overall, to win the fight. And in my view, it was a fight that he really won because, once again, I'm sorry, but Gervonta Davis takes a knee. That's supposed to be a knockdown, like 110%. Not even a debate. Not even a debate. But it is what it is. And like I said, it's going to be interesting to see a lot of these LDBC and new media channels, these same ones that complained about Fury and Wilder, how corrupt that was because of an alleged long count, even though we've seen that with multiple fights before, like with Tony Harrison and Jamel Charlo and other fights that's like that as well, where the referee, kind of let them have until 9 or 10, kind of overall, to get up, and be back in the fight, especially in a championship level fight. However, what I've never seen is a referee overall, once again, at least in a fight of this magnitude, to where the fighter took a knee and he just called it off. I've never personally seen that, but it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching. Let me know what y'all thought. I personally had thought that Lamont Roach Jr. had just won the fight, but it was a very close fight. It was a very interesting fight, but good on Lamont Roach Jr. He was showing to Gervonta Davis that I'm not afraid of you and I'm not going to bend to your will, and I'm going to show you that I can win this fight. On the inside, on the outside, and pretty much within every range. He had the courage to actually throw down with Gervonta Davis, and that's why this fight was so close. Now, that being stated, what about Gervonta Davis's future? How do possible fights against Lomachenko or against Shakur Stevenson look? Well, it's a little bit hard to tell because it's a little bit hard to tell how seriously Gervonta Davis actually took Lamont Roach Jr. for this fight, and on top of that, if he's going to improve after this, or on top of that, if the styles are just going to be a little bit different. But I stated that after Shakur Stevenson's most recent performance, that I don't see how he beats Gervonta Davis. Well, I might have to change my opinion a little bit on that now. I think that Lamont Roach was able to fight Gervonta Davis in a great way. Not sure if the Shakur Stevenson fight's going to play out like that exactly, but I also don't think that the fight is going to happen next anyway. So, we're going to see more than likely a rerun of this fight in my personal view. So we're going to see if Gervonta Davis makes some massive improvements or if he looks even worse or about the same. We'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this fight. I'll give a little bit more of an analysis on it tomorrow. But great on Mr. Lamont Roach. What did I think the, positives and the negatives of both fighters were? Gervonta Davis, I just thought that his offense was a little bit too limited within this fight. I thought that he needed to use his jab a little bit more, especially more of a variety jab. He definitely needed to use a little bit more of, the right hand, in my personal view, try to do a little bit more body work, even though he tried. He's just got to throw more throughout some of this fight. You can't rely on, that power throughout the whole entire time. And I think that Gervonta expected eventually that Lamont Roach Jr. was going to go down, and it didn't happen. As for Lamont Roach Jr., I think that his performance was pretty damn good. The only thing that I would state is that use your jab a little bit more early on next time. Try to get a little bit of an earlier speed against him. Keep that right hand glued to your face just like you did throughout the majority of the fight. But get out of the range a little bit sooner. Use your feet a little bit more. Because you could have made it severely hard for Gervonta Davis and ran him into certain shots maybe on the back foot, overall. Had you really used your feet a little bit more. Sometimes I think there were some times to where he kind of stayed in the range a bit too long, which I stated that would be a little bit of an issue with him. If he can use his feet a little bit more, the fight may even be able to go in his favor even more dominantly. So be careful of that. And also use a little bit more lateral movement. Don't just back up in a straight line, with one hand down and, you allow Gervonta Davis to land two straight left hands. But other than that, very great fight, very interesting fight. Very poor performance by Gervonta Davis in my view, but great performance by Lamont Roach Jr. Because, of course, the standards of these two fighters are completely different. Gervonta is expected to be a top 10 pound-for-pound guy. Lamont Roach is a guy that probably wouldn't even be top 40 pound-for-pound on many people's lists. So, it just is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see where this goes, and I'll talk to you all later.